Elena didn't know that the man sitting by the fireplace in the chamber she'd just entered was the Alpha King. She didn't know that his golden eyes had been searching for her across kingdoms for years, and she certainly didn't know that her stumbling through the wrong door would change both their lives forever. What she did know was that she was lost. Again. The palace corridors were a maze of identical oak doors and polished marble floors that reflected the flickering torchlight. Elena clutched the bundle of fresh linens against her chest, her worn boots silent against the cold stone as she counted doorways. "Third door on the left after the tapestry," matron had said. But there had been 2 tapestries, and Eleanor's head still ached from the fever that had kept her bedridden for 3 days. She turned the brass handle of what she hoped was the linen closet and stepped inside, already mentally preparing her apology for being late with the weekly deliveries. Instead of wooden shelves and folded sheets, she found herself in a chamber that took her breath away. Rich burgundy drapes framed tall windows that overlooked the royal gardens. A fire crackled in an ornate hearth carved with wolves and crowned lions. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, more books than Elena had ever seen in one place. The air smelled of leather and cedar and something warm she couldn't name. And sitting in a high-backed chair beside the fire, looking up from an open book, was the most devastatingly beautiful man Elena had ever seen. He had dark hair that caught the firelight in deep bronze highlights and broad shoulders that filled out his white shirt in a way that made something flutter in Elena's stomach. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold, golden eyes that seemed to see straight through her, as if he'd been waiting for her to walk through that door her entire life. "Oh," Elena breathed, heat flooding her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, my lord. I was looking for the linen closet and I—" The words died in her throat as the man slowly closed his book and rose to his feet. He was tall, impossibly tall, with a presence that seemed to fill the entire room. When he looked at her, Elena felt something impossible happen in her chest. A warmth that spread through her ribs like golden honey, sweet and overwhelming and completely foreign. "Wrong room, sorry," Elena stammered, taking a step backward toward the door. Her heart was racing for reasons she couldn't understand. Every instinct she'd developed over 22 years of being invisible was screaming at her to run. Important men didn't look at servant girls the way this man was looking at her, like she was something precious, like she mattered. She turned to flee, but a warm hand caught her arm, gentle but firm. "No," the man said, and his voice was deep velvet that made her knees weak. "Right room, finally." Elena's breath caught. The touch of his fingers on her sleeve sent heat racing up her arm and settling somewhere behind her sternum like a second heartbeat. She'd never felt anything like it, this pull, this inexplicable need to lean into him instead of away. "I don't understand," she whispered, looking up into those impossible golden eyes. "I'm just a servant. I was bringing linens to—" "What's your name?" he asked, and something in his voice made her answer before she could think better of it. "Elena," she said, then immediately wished she hadn't. Servants weren't supposed to give their names to nobles unless asked directly, and even then they were supposed to curtsy first. She'd done everything wrong. "Elena," he repeated, and the way he said it made her name sound like a prayer. "I'm Kieran. Just Kieran. No title, no formality. As if they were equals, which was impossible. This man wore clothes that cost more than Elena made in a year. His hands were strong but uncalloused. His bearing spoke of power and authority. He was clearly high nobility, possibly a duke or marquess. And Elena was nobody, less than nobody. "My lord, I should go," Elena said, trying to pull away. "I don't belong here." But Kieran didn't release her arm. Instead, he studied her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed, as if he could see every secret she'd ever kept. "Stay," he said simply. "Please." The word hung between them like a bridge Eleanor was too terrified to cross. Men like him didn't say please to girls like her. They gave orders, made demands. They certainly didn't look at servant girls as if they were the answer to questions they'd been asking their whole lives. "I can't," Elena whispered, but her feet wouldn't move. "If someone sees me here, I'll lose my position. I need this job." Something flickered across Kieran's face, something that looked almost like pain. "You work here, in the palace?" Elena nodded, acutely aware of her simple brown dress, her scuffed boots, the way her hair had escaped its braid after a day of hauling laundry. "In the kitchens and laundries. I've been here 2 years." 2 years, Kieran murmured, and there was wonder in his voice that Eleanor didn't understand. "How have I never seen you?" The question was so absurd that Eleanor almost laughed. "Because you wouldn't. Nobody sees people like me. We're meant to be invisible." The golden eyes flashed with something fierce, and Kieran's hand tightened slightly on her arm. Not hurting, never hurting, but possessive in a way that made Eleanor's stomach flutter with dangerous warmth. "Invisible," he said, and the word sounded like a curse. "No, never invisible, not to me." Eleanor's heart was hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it. This was madness. She was a servant girl with no family, no dowry, no prospects beyond washing sheets and scrubbing floors until her hands were raw. He was clearly nobility, probably promised to some beautiful duchess with perfect manners and a pedigree that could be traced back centuries. But the way he looked at her made Elena feel like she was someone worth looking at, someone worth talking to, someone who mattered. "I should really go," Elena said again, but the protest sounded weak even to her own ears. "Have tea with me," Kieran said suddenly, and the request was so unexpected that Eleanor could only stare at him. "Tea?" she repeated stupidly. "It's nearly evening, and I was about to ring for service anyway. Stay, keep me company." His thumb brushed against her sleeve, a touch so light it shouldn't have sent fire racing through her veins. "Unless you have somewhere else you need to be." Eleanor thought of the empty servants' quarters that awaited her, of the thin soup and hard bread that would be her dinner, of the loneliness that had been her constant companion since she was old enough to understand that she was different from the other girls, that she had no family to write to, no home to return to during festivals. "I don't," she admitted quietly. Kieran smiled, and Eleanor felt something in her chest crack open like a door she'd kept locked her entire life. "Then stay," he said again, and this time Eleanor found herself nodding. As if summoned by magic, a soft knock sounded at the door. "Come," Kieran called, finally releasing Eleanor's arm to walk to his chair by the fire. A servant entered carrying a silver tea service, and Elena tensed, waiting for the inevitable shock, the recognition of her status, the order to remove herself immediately. Instead, the man simply set the tray on the table between 2 chairs and withdrew with a respectful bow. Kieran gestured to the chair across from his. "Please." Eleanor perched on the edge of the seat as if ready to flee at any moment, which she was. The chair was more comfortable than her bed, upholstered in soft blue fabric that probably cost more than Elena's yearly wages. "How do you take your tea?" Kieran asked, and the domesticity of the question in such an impossible situation made Elena's head spin. However you think is best," Elena said, then immediately felt foolish. She'd had tea exactly 3 times in her life, all of them when she'd been sick and the kitchen cook had taken pity on her. Kieran poured 2 cups, adding honey to both, and handed her one. Their fingers brushed as she took it, and Elena nearly dropped the delicate porcelain at the shock of warmth that raced through her. "Tell me about yourself," Kieran said, settling back in his chair with his own cup. "How did you come to work at the palace?" Elena stared into her tea, watching the honey swirl in golden ribbons. "There's not much to tell. I was left at the convent when I was a baby. The sisters raised me until I was old enough to work, and then I came here." "No family at all?" Kieran asked gently. Elena shook her head. "Just me, always just me." When she looked up, she found Kieran watching her with an expression she couldn't read, something that looked like understanding, or maybe recognition. That must have been very lonely, he said. Elena shrugged, taking a careful sip of her tea. It was perfect, warm and sweet, and unlike anything she'd ever tasted. You can't miss what you never had. But that wasn't entirely true, was it? Elena had spent her whole life watching other people belong to each other, wishing she understood what that felt like. Watching the married servants steal kisses in the corridors, seeing the way mothers looked at their children in the village, observing the easy camaraderie between friends who'd known each other since childhood. "I understand," Kieran said quietly, and something in his voice made Eleanor look at him sharply. "Do you?" "Loneliness," Kieran said, staring into the fire. "It's possible to be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone, to have everyone want something from you, but no one who actually wants you." Eleanor felt her breath catch. The way he said it, with such quiet pain, made her forget for a moment that he was nobility and she was nothing, made her forget everything except the ache of recognition in his voice. "Yes," she whispered, "exactly like that." Their eyes met across the small table, and Elena felt that impossible warmth spread through her chest again, as if something had just clicked into place, some piece of herself she hadn't known was missing. "Thank you," Kieran said softly. "For what?" "For staying, for being honest." He leaned forward slightly, and Elena caught a hint of his scent, something like cedar and rain and safety. "For opening the right door." Elena's heart stuttered. "It was the wrong door. I was looking for the linen closet." "No," Kieran said, and his voice held a certainty that made Elena's pulse race. "Trust me, it was exactly the right door." The days that followed were a strange blur of stolen moments and secret conversations that Elena couldn't quite believe were real. Every evening after her duties were finished, she found herself climbing the marble stairs to Kieran's chambers. Not because he summoned her, he never did that, but because when she tried to stay away, something in her chest pulled so tight she could barely breathe. The golden thread that had wound itself around her heart, the moment their eyes met, seemed to tug her toward him with a force she couldn't understand or resist. Elena perched on the edge of the blue chair that had somehow become hers, nursing a cup of tea that tasted like honey and possibilities. Kieran sat across from her, asking gentle questions about her life, her dreams, her fears, questions no one had ever bothered to ask before. "Tell me about the convent," Kieran said, his golden eyes warm in the firelight. "What was it like growing up there?" Eleanor wrapped her hands around her teacup, letting the warmth seep into her palms. Quiet, safe. The sisters were kind but distant. They had so many children to care for, and I learned early not to be any trouble. "How early?" Kieran asked, and something in his voice made Elena look up sharply. "I don't remember not knowing," Elena admitted. "I was maybe 4 or 5 when I realised that some children got letters from their families, and some got visits, and some got taken home for festivals. I was one of the ones who stayed behind." Kieran's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and Elena rushed to continue. "But it was fine. I had books and the garden, and Sister Margaret taught me to read and write better than most nobles' daughters." She managed a small smile. "She said I had a gift for it." "What did you dream of becoming?" Kieran asked softly. "When you were small?" Eleanor's cheeks heated. "You'll think it's foolish." "I could never think anything about you was foolish." The sincerity in his voice made Eleanor's heart skip. "I wanted to be a scribe, to work with books and letters and important documents. Sister Margaret said I had the finest handwriting she'd ever seen." Eleanor laughed, but there was no humour in it. "But dreams like that aren't for girls like me." "Girls like you," Kieran repeated, and there was something dangerous in his tone. "What do you mean by that?" "Nobody girls, girls with no family, no dowry, no connections." Elena set down her teacup and folded her hands in her lap. "Girls who should be grateful for any honest work they can find." "And are you?" Kieran asked. "Grateful?" Elena considered lying, giving the expected answer. Instead, She found herself telling the truth. "I'm grateful to have food and shelter, but sometimes—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Sometimes what?" "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to matter, to have someone look for me if I didn't come home, to have someone care if I was happy or sad or afraid." Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. "To have someone who was mine, and who I was theirs." Kieran went very still, and when Eleanor looked at him, his eyes were blazing with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Eleanor," he started, but was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. "Your Majesty," a voice called, formal and urgent. "The council requires your immediate attention." Elena's teacup slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, shattering against the marble floor in an explosion of porcelain and tea. She stared at the broken pieces, her mind struggling to process what she'd just heard. "Your Majesty." Kieran, her Kieran who asked about her dreams and made her feel like she mattered, was the king, the Alpha King, the most powerful man in the kingdom. Elena shot to her feet so fast that her chair rocked backward. "Oh, gods," she breathed, pressing her hands to her mouth. "Oh, gods, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I never would have—" "Elena, it's all right," Kieran said, rising slowly, his hands extended toward her as if she were a frightened animal that might bolt. "All right?" Elena's voice climbed toward hysteria. "I've been sitting in your chambers drinking tea and telling you about my foolish dreams like we're equals. I called you by your first name. I didn't bow or curtsy or—" She backed toward the door, panic clawing at her throat. "They'll execute me for familiarity with the crown. I'll be hanged for—" "No!" Kieran's voice cracked like a whip, and Elena froze. "No one will touch you. Do you understand me?" The guard knocked again, more urgently. "Your Majesty, please." "Go," Elena whispered, tears burning her eyes. "I'll leave. I'll disappear. I'll tell no one about—" "You'll do nothing of the sort." Kieran moved toward her, and Eleanor saw something wild flash in his golden eyes, something that wasn't quite human. "You'll stay exactly where you are until I return." "Your Majesty!" "Kieran," he said fiercely. "My name is Kieran, and you will call me that. Nothing between us changes because of a title." Elena stared at him in shock. "Everything changes. I'm a servant and you're the king. I'm nobody and you're—" "You're not nobody," Kieran said, and his voice was so quiet, so certain, that it stopped Elena's panicked words. "You're the woman I've been waiting for my entire life." The declaration hung between them like a bridge Elena was terrified to cross. Before she could respond, Kieran strode to the door and yanked it open, revealing a nervous-looking young man in royal livery. "This had better be important, Marcus," Kieran said, and his tone could have frozen fire. "Lord Valen has called for an emergency session regarding the border disputes, Your Majesty. He says it cannot wait." Kieran's jaw tightened. Of course he does. He turned back to Eleanor, who was still standing frozen by her overturned chair. "We're not finished with this conversation." "Yes, we are," Elena whispered. "We have to be." Something flickered across Kieran's face that looked like pain. "Have dinner with me tomorrow night." "I can't." "Not as your king," Kieran said, his voice dropping to that velvet tone that made Elena's knees weak. "As the man who wants to know if you prefer roses or wildflowers, as someone who thinks your dreams of being a scribe aren't foolish at all, but brilliant." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. "Why?" "Because for the first time in my life, I don't feel alone when I'm talking to someone." Kieran stepped closer, and Elena caught that scent of cedar and rain that made her want to lean into him. "Because when you look at me, you see me, not my crown, not my power, just me." "But you're the king," Elena said helplessly. "I'm a man who's been lonely his entire life," Kieran said simply. "A man who thought he'd never find someone who wanted him for who he was instead of what he could give them. A man who's terrified that the most perfect woman he's ever met is going to run away because she's afraid of what other people will think." Elena's breath caught. "Perfect? I'm not—" "You are." Kieran's hand lifted as if to touch her face, then dropped back to his side. "You're brave and kind and brilliant and beautiful, and you have no idea how extraordinary you are." The guard cleared his throat nervously. "Your Majesty, the council—" "We'll wait," Kieran said, without taking his eyes off Elena. "Answer me. Will you have dinner with me tomorrow?" Elena stared into those impossible golden eyes and felt her resolve crumble. Every logical thought in her head was screaming that this was madness, that kings didn't fall for servant girls, that she was setting herself up for heartbreak beyond imagining. But the loneliness in his voice matched the ache in her own chest. The way he looked at her made her feel like she was someone worth looking at, someone worth knowing, someone worth waiting for. "I'll probably run away," Eleanor whispered. Kieran's smile was soft and devastatingly beautiful. "I'll wait. However long you need, I'll wait." "This is impossible." "Most of the best things are." Elena closed her eyes, and when she opened them, she found Kieran still watching her with that patient, hopeful expression that made her heart race. "Yes," she breathed, "I'll have dinner with you." The relief that crossed Kieran's face was so profound that Eleanor felt something crack open in her chest, as if she'd just given him something precious instead of agreeing to something that would probably destroy them both. "Thank you," Kieran said quietly. Then to the guard, "Tell the council I'll be there momentarily." Marcus bowed and hurried away. Kieran turned back to Eleanor, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "I should go," Eleanor said finally. "Should." Kieran's mouth quirked in a wry smile. That's a dangerous word, full of other people's expectations. "Your Majesty?" "Kieran." Eleanor's cheeks heated. "Kieran, what if someone sees me leaving your chambers?" "Then they'll see a woman leaving my chambers," Kieran said calmly. "It's not illegal." "But they'll talk." "Let them." Kieran stepped closer, and Eleanor felt that golden warmth spread through her chest again. "I don't care what anyone says about me, but if anyone says anything cruel about you, they'll answer to me." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made Eleanor's pulse skip. No one had ever stood up for her before. No one had ever thought she was worth defending. "Why?" Elena asked softly. "Why me?" Kieran was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if he were memorizing every detail. "Because when you walked through that door 3 days ago, everything that was broken in me started healing," he said finally. "Because you make me remember what it feels like to hope." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. "I don't know how to do this." "Neither do I," Kieran admitted. "But I'd rather figure it out with you than spend another day pretending I don't need someone to figure it out with." A distant bell chimed the hour, and Kieran sighed. "I have to go before Lord Valen decides I've been assassinated and declares himself regent." Eleanor managed a shaky laugh. "That would be unfortunate." "Catastrophic," Kieran agreed, and his smile made Eleanor's heart flutter. "Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, don't run away." "I make no promises," Eleanor said, but she was almost smiling. "I'll take almost smiling over tears," Kieran said softly. "Lock the door behind me. Take whatever time you need before you leave." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Elena?" "Yes?" "Thank you for staying, even when it frightened you." And then he was gone, leaving Elena alone in his chambers with her shattered teacup, her racing heart, and the impossible knowledge that the king of the realm wanted to have dinner with her. A servant girl who until 4 days ago had been completely invisible. Elena sank back into her chair and buried her face in her hands, trying to make sense of a world that had suddenly turned completely upside down. 3 days became 5, became 7, and Elena found herself living in a dream she was terrified of waking from. Every evening at 7 o'clock she climbed the marble stairs to Kieran's chambers, her heart hammering with a mixture of anticipation and disbelief. Every evening he welcomed her with that devastating smile that made her forget, for precious hours, that she was nobody and he was everything. They talked about books. He had read everything she'd ever dreamed of reading and more. They discussed philosophy and poetry while sharing intimate dinners by the fireplace. Kieran told her stories of distant kingdoms and ancient magic that made her eyes shine with wonder. Elena shared her memories of the convent gardens, her favourite hiding spots among the books, the silly songs Sister Margaret used to hum while they worked. And with each passing evening, the golden thread that bound them together grew stronger, more impossible to ignore. "Tell me something no one else knows," Kieran said softly, refilling her wineglass with care. They were seated at the small table near the window, dinner forgotten as they talked deep into the night. Elena considered the request, her cheeks warm from wine and firelight, and the way Kieran looked at her as if she were the most fascinating person in the world. "I used to pretend I was a princess," she admitted, then immediately felt foolish. "When I was small, I mean. I would tell myself that my real parents were royalty, and that someday they would come for me and explain that leaving me at the convent was all a terrible mistake." Instead of laughing, Kieran leaned forward with genuine interest. "How old were you when you stopped pretending?" 12, maybe 13, when I realised that even if it were true, it wouldn't matter. A princess who grows up as a servant girl isn't really a princess anymore. She's just a girl with impossible dreams. "Or," Kieran said quietly, "she's a princess who learned compassion and strength that she never would have known from a throne." Elena's breath caught at the tenderness in his voice. "You're trying to make me feel better about childhood fantasies." "I'm trying to make you see what I see when I look at you." Kieran reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The touch sent warmth racing up her arm, that now familiar golden heat that made her pulse skip. "Grace, kindness, intelligence, courage. You have more nobility in your little finger than most people born to titles have in their entire bodies." Eleanor stared down at their joined hands, his so much larger than hers, strong and warm and gentle. "Now tell me something no one else knows," she whispered. Kieran was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. "I used to wish I was anybody else," he said finally. "When I was young, I would sneak out of the palace and pretend to be a merchant's son or a farmer's boy, someone who could choose his own life, his own path, someone who could fall in love with whoever he wanted without considering alliances and treaties and bloodlines." "And now?" Elena asked softly. Kieran's golden eyes met hers, and Eleanor saw such depth of feeling there that it made her chest tight. "Now, I'm grateful for every choice that led me to that chair by the fireplace the night you walked through my door." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "Kieran, I know this is complicated," Kieran said, squeezing her hand gently. "I know there are 1,000 reasons why this should be impossible, but when I'm with you, none of them seem to matter." Eleanor wanted to tell him that they did matter, that the world outside these chambers wouldn't be as understanding as he was. But before she could speak, Kieran lifted their joined hands to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles. The touch was so gentle, so reverent, that Eleanor felt something fundamental shift in her chest, like a door she'd kept locked her entire life finally swinging open. "Elena," Kieran murmured against her hand, and she could feel the warmth of his breath against her skin. "May I—" A sharp knock at the door shattered the moment like glass. "Your Majesty," came an urgent voice. "Emergency council session. Border attack at Millhaven." Kieran's jaw tightened, but he didn't release Elena's hand. "How bad?" 17 dead, my lord, women and children among them." Elena felt Kieran's entire body go tense with rage and grief. She started to pull her hand away, understanding that duty called, but his fingers tightened around hers. "I have to go," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving her face. "I know." Eleanor smiled, though her heart was breaking a little at the interruption. "Go. People need you. Will you—" Kieran hesitated, vulnerability flickering across his features. "Will you be here when I get back?" The question hung between them, heavy with meaning. Eleanor knew what he was really asking. Not just would she wait for him tonight, but would she keep coming back? Would she keep choosing this impossible thing between them, despite all the reasons she should run? "Yes," Elena whispered. "I'll wait." Relief flooded Kieran's face. He brought her hand to his lips once more, this kiss longer, more intentional. "Thank you," he murmured against her skin, "for staying, for being here, for being you." And then he was gone, leaving Elena alone with the remains of their dinner and a heart so full it felt like it might burst. She was still sitting at the table, lost in thought, when she heard voices in the corridor outside. Female voices getting closer. "Absolutely ridiculous! A servant girl, can you imagine?" Elena's blood went cold. She recognised that voice. Lady Cassandra Whitmore, daughter of the Duke of Westmarch, and one of the most beautiful women at court. "Lower your voice, Cassandra," came another woman's voice. "Someone might hear." "Let them hear," Lady Cassandra said with a laugh that sounded like breaking crystal. "Everyone knows the king is amusing himself with some little kitchen maid. It's actually rather sweet in a pathetic sort of way." Eleanor pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting the urge to be sick. "You don't think it's serious?" the other woman asked. "Ye's serious?" Lady Cassandra's voice dripped with disdain. "Oh, my dear, of course not. Men like Kieran don't marry servants. They play with them until they tire of the novelty, then send them away with a handful of coins and a pat on the head. Mark my words, by winter he'll be looking for a real queen, someone suitable." "And you think that someone might be you?" "I know it will be me." Lady Cassandra's voice grew smug. "My father has been negotiating the alliance for months. The announcement will come as soon as the king tires of his little pet." Elena felt the world tilt around her. Pet. That's what she was to them. To everyone. A temporary amusement for a king who would eventually need to choose a real partner. "But what if he truly cares for her?" the other woman pressed. Lady Cassandra laughed again, and the sound made Elena's skin crawl. "Cares for her? He doesn't even know her real name, probably. These servant girls are all the same. Throw themselves at the first man who shows them attention, thinking they can seduce their way to a better life. It's actually quite pathetic. The king is simply too kind to hurt her feelings by telling her the truth." Eleanor's hands were shaking so hard she nearly knocked over her wine-glass. The truth. The truth that she was deluding herself. The truth that kings didn't fall in love with nobody girls from convents. The truth that she was exactly what Lady Cassandra said she was, a temporary distraction for a man who would eventually need to marry his equal. "Well," the other woman said as their voices began to fade, "I suppose we'll see how long the novelty lasts." "Not long," Lady Cassandra said with certainty. "It never does." Eleanor sat in the sudden silence, their cruel words echoing in her mind like a curse. Every doubt she'd pushed aside over the past week came flooding back with devastating clarity. What had she been thinking? That she could have fairy tale endings? That she could sit at tables with kings and matter to them? That someone like Kieran could actually want someone like her for more than a few stolen evenings? She was exactly what she'd always been. Nothing. Nobody. A servant girl with impossible dreams who'd mistaken kindness for something deeper. Elena stood on unsteady legs and began clearing the dinner dishes, her hands moving automatically through the familiar motions of service. This was what she was good at. This was what she belonged doing. Not sitting at tables as an equal, but cleaning up after her betters. When Kieran returned 2 hours later, he found Elena by the fireplace, but not in her usual chair. She was kneeling on the floor, scrubbing wine stains from the marble where she'd spilled her glass earlier. "Elena?" Kieran's voice was sharp with concern. "What are you doing?" "Cleaning up my mess," Elena said without looking up, her voice carefully neutral. "I'm sorry about the stain. I was clumsy." Kieran crossed the room in 3 quick strides and knelt beside her, his hand covering hers on the cloth. "Stop. Leave it. The servants will handle it tomorrow." Eleanor finally looked at him, and Kieran sucked in a sharp breath at the careful blankness in her eyes. I am the servants, Elena said quietly. This is what I do. Something flickered across Kieran's face, hurt, confusion, and growing alarm. What happened? You were fine when I left. Elena pulled her hand free and sat back on her heels. I came to my senses. What does that mean? It means I remembered who I am. Eleanor's voice was steady, but Kieran could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself like she was preparing for a blow. And who you are. Kieran felt ice form in his stomach. Elena, what happened while I was gone? Nothing happened, I just had time to think. Elena stood and smoothed down her simple brown dress, the motion somehow final. This has been lovely, truly, but we both know it can't continue. No, Kieran said, rising as well. We don't both know that. I don't know that at all. Eleanor's composure cracked slightly. You're the king. I'm a servant. You need to marry someone suitable. Someone who can be a real queen. Someone what? Kieran's voice had gone dangerously quiet. Someone like Lady Cassandra? Elena's sharp intake of breath told him everything he needed to know. She was here, Kieran said, and it wasn't a question. She said something to you. She didn't say anything to me, Elena said truthfully. She doesn't know I exist, but she said plenty about me. Kieran's hands clenched into fists. What did she say? The truth. Elena's voice broke slightly on the word. That you're amusing yourself until you tire of the novelty. That men like you don't marry girls like me. That by winter you'll be looking for a real queen. And you believed her. The pain in Kieran's voice made Elena's chest ache. Shouldn't I? Elena whispered. Isn't she right? Kieran stared at her for a long moment, and Elena saw something wild and desperate flash in his golden eyes. When he spoke, his voice was raw with emotion. I have spent my entire life being told what I should do, who I should marry, how I should rule. I have never, not once, made a choice based solely on what I wanted. Kieran took a step toward her, and Elena saw his hands trembling. Do you really think I would waste both our time on a temporary amusement? Elena wanted to say yes, wanted to protect herself with cynicism and doubt, but the naked honesty in his voice stopped her. I don't know, she whispered. Then let me tell you. Kieran's voice dropped to that velvet tone that made her knees weak. You are not a novelty. You are not a distraction. You are the first thing that has ever made sense to me in my entire life. Eleanor felt tears burn her eyes. But Lady Cassandra is a bitter woman who sees love as a transaction and can't understand anything else. Kieran's voice hardened. She's also wrong, dead wrong. About what? Kieran stepped closer, and Eleanor caught that scent of cedar and rain that made her want to lean into him despite everything. About what I need, he said softly. I don't need a suitable queen, Elena. I need you. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of stolen kisses, whispered promises, and a growing certainty that Eleanor was falling in love with a man she could never truly have. Despite Kieran's fierce declaration that night, despite the way he looked at her like she hung the stars, Eleanor couldn't shake Lady Cassandra's words. They echoed in her mind during every quiet moment, a poison that spread through her happiness and left her constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. Kieran seemed to sense her lingering doubts. He became more attentive, more openly affectionate, as if he could love the insecurities right out of her. He showed her parts of the palace she'd never seen, the royal library with its soaring ceilings and endless shelves, the private gardens where ancient roses bloomed in impossible colours, the tower room where he went to think when the weight of the crown became too heavy. This is where I come when I need to remember why I do this, Kieran said one evening, leading her onto the balcony that overlooked the kingdom. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that matched his eyes. When I need to remember that it's not about the title or the power, it's about the people. Elena stood beside him at the stone railing, acutely aware of his warmth, the way her pulse skipped whenever he was near. below them, the city sprawled out like a living tapestry, smoke rising from countless chimneys, lights beginning to twinkle in windows as families gathered for their evening meals. "Do you ever regret it?" Elena asked softly. "The crown, I mean, the responsibility." Kieran was quiet for a long moment, his hands resting beside hers on the stone. "I used to. When I was younger, I resented every choice that was made for me, every freedom I had to surrender for duty." His voice dropped lower. "But lately, I find myself grateful for the path that led me here. Because if I hadn't been king, I never would have been in those chambers the night you stumbled through my door." Elena's breath caught. Even now, after 2 weeks of his constant reassurances, she could hardly believe that someone like him could want someone like her. "Elena," Kieran said, turning to face her fully, "there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you from the beginning." Eleanor's heart lurched. This was it. This was when he told her that Lady Cassandra was right, that he needed to think about marriage alliances and suitable queens. "The night you came to my chambers," Kieran continued, his golden eyes intense in the fading light. "It wasn't chance, not entirely." Elena frowned. "What do you mean?" Kieran reached for her hands, his touch warm and steady. "I'm a shifter, Elena, an alpha wolf, and shifters, we have mates. One person in the world who is meant for us, chosen by fate itself." Elena stared at him, her mind struggling to process his words. "Mates?" "The moment I saw you, I knew." Kieran's voice was soft, reverent. "There's a bond between us, a golden thread that connects our souls. You've felt it too, haven't you? The warmth, the pull, the way everything feels right when we're together." Eleanor's heart was racing. The golden warmth she'd felt from the very first moment, the inexplicable need to be near him, the way her entire world had shifted the instant their eyes met. It all suddenly made sense. "I felt it," she whispered, "but I thought it was just attraction, infatuation." "It's so much more than that." Kieran lifted one of her hands to his chest, pressing her palm against his heart. "This bond, Eleanor, it's sacred, unbreakable. It means you're not just someone I care about. You're my other half, my destiny." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but she wasn't sure if they were from joy or despair. "But that makes it worse, don't you see? If we're truly meant to be together, then fate is cruel, because I'm still nobody and you're still the king, and being destined for each other doesn't change the fact that the world will never accept us." "The world will learn to accept us," Kieran said fiercely. "I don't care what anyone thinks." "But I do." The words tore from Elena's throat like a confession. "I care because I love you too much to watch you lose everything for me." Kieran went very still. "You love me." Elena closed her eyes, the admission hanging between them like a bridge she'd finally found the courage to cross. "I love you so much it terrifies me. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you make me feel like I matter. I love how you listen to my dreams like they're important and how you hold me like I'm precious." Her voice broke. "And that's why I know I have to let you go." "No." Kieran's voice was raw with desperation. "Elena, no. You don't get to decide what's best for me. You don't get to choose my sacrifices." "Someone has to," Elena said, opening her eyes to look at him. "Because you'll choose me every time, even if it destroys you, even if it destroys the kingdom." Before Kieran could respond, a commotion erupted in the courtyard below. Shouts, the sound of running feet, the clash of steel on steel. Kieran spun toward the noise, his entire body going tense. "What in the seven hells— Your Majesty!" A guard's voice rang out from somewhere in the palace. "We're under attack." Elena's blood went cold. Attack! Here, in the heart of the palace. Kieran was already moving, his hand going to the sword at his side. "Elena, get back inside. Lock yourself in my chambers and don't come out until—" A crossbow bolt whistled through the air, missing Kieran's head by inches and embedding itself in the stone wall behind them. Down! Kieran roared, tackling Elena to the ground, just as another bolt sailed through the space where she'd been standing. Elena hit the stone floor of the balcony hard, Kieran's body covering hers protectively. She could feel the tension in every muscle, could smell the wild, dangerous scent that meant his wolf was close to the surface. "The door," Kieran said urgently. "We need to get to the door." They crawled across the balcony, keeping low as more bolts flew overhead. Elena's heart was hammering so hard she could barely think, but one thought cut through the panic with crystal clarity. Someone was trying to kill Kieran. They reached the doorway that led back into the tower room just as masked figures burst through the main entrance. 3 men dressed in black, crossbows raised. "Well, well," the leader said, his voice muffled by his mask. "The king and his little pet. How convenient." Elena felt Kieran's entire body go rigid with rage. "Lord Valen," he said, and his voice held the promise of violence. The man pulled off his mask, revealing a cruelly handsome face and cold grey eyes. "Your Majesty, I do hope we're not interrupting anything important." "Just planning your execution," Kieran said conversationally, rising slowly to his feet. "Elena, get behind me." But Elena was staring at Lord Valen with growing horror, a memory surfacing from the depths of her mind. She'd seen this man before, not at court. She would have remembered that. Somewhere else, somewhere that made her blood run cold. "I know you," Elena whispered, and Lord Valen's attention snapped to her. "Do you now?" Valen's smile was sharp as a blade. "How fascinating, and here I thought you were just a pretty little nobody." Elena's mind raced, pieces of a puzzle clicking together with sickening clarity. The night she was left at the convent, the torn piece of fabric that was the only clue to her identity. The sister who had taken her in had whispered about nobles and betrayal and blood on the stones. "You killed them," Elena breathed. "My family. You killed them." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Kieran went still, his golden eyes wide with shock. Lord Valen's smile widened. "Ah, there's that Lysandra intelligence. I was wondering when it would surface." "Lysandra?" Kieran's voice was deadly quiet. "Oh yes," Valen said, clearly enjoying himself. "Your little pet isn't quite as common as she pretends. Elena Lysandra, last surviving heir of the House of Lysandra, the family I had eliminated 22 years ago to claim their lands." His grey eyes glittered with malice. "The family that had a legitimate claim to challenge the crown." Eleanor felt the world tilt around her. House of Lysandra, royal blood. Everything she'd ever believed about herself was a lie. "Your nobility," Kieran said, wonder and realization dawning in his voice. "True nobility." "Was nobility," Valen corrected. "Now she's just a loose end I should have tied up years ago." He raised his crossbow, aiming directly at Elena's heart. "But it's not too late to correct that mistake." Elena saw the bolt coming as if time had slowed, saw Kieran's face contort with terror and rage, saw him lunge forward, putting himself between her and the deadly projectile. The bolt took him in the shoulder instead of her chest, spinning him around with the force of the impact. He hit the ground hard, blood already spreading across his white shirt. "Kieran!" Eleanor's scream tore from her throat as she dropped to her knees beside him. His face was pale, his breathing laboured, but his eyes were blazing with fury. "Behind you!" he gasped. Elena spun, just as one of Valen's men lunged at her with a dagger. Without thinking, she grabbed a heavy silver candlestick from the nearby table and swung it with all her strength. The man dropped like a stone. "Impressive," Valen said, but his voice had lost some of its mockery. But ultimately futile. Eleanor looked around desperately for another weapon, anything to defend them with. That's when she saw it, the emergency bell rope that hung near the window. If she could reach it, if she could ring it, the palace guards would come. She dove for the rope, Valen's curse echoing behind her. Her fingers closed around the thick cord just as his hand closed around her ankle, yanking her backward. Elena hit the floor hard, but managed to pull the rope as she fell. The great bell in the tower began to toll, its deep voice carrying across the entire palace. "You little bitch!" Valen snarled, raising his dagger. The blade came down. Eleanor rolled, felt the steel whistle past her ear, rolled again as Valen struck at her desperately, his composure finally cracking. And then Kieran was there, moving with inhuman speed despite his wound. His hand closed around Valen's throat, lifting the man off the ground with strength that was definitely not entirely human. "You," Kieran said, and his voice had gone deep and wild, "made a very serious mistake." His eyes were no longer golden. They were the bright amber of a wolf, and they promised death. "You tried to kill my mate," Kieran continued, his grip tightening. "You tried to kill the woman I love. You tried to take away the only thing in this world that matters to me." Elena could hear the sound of running feet in the corridors, guards responding to the bell. But all her attention was focused on Kieran, on the way his fury was contained and controlled, and absolutely terrifying. "Please!" Valen gasped, clawing at Kieran's grip. "I'll leave. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again." "No," Kieran said simply. "You won't." The sound of Valen's neck breaking was lost in the crash of the doors bursting open as the palace guard flooded into the room. Elena sat on the floor, staring at Kieran as he dropped Valen's body and turned to her. His eyes were still amber, still wild, but when he looked at her, they filled with such profound relief and love that Elena felt her heart crack open. "Elena," he whispered, dropping to his knees beside her. "Are you hurt?" "No," Elena managed, even though she was shaking so hard she could barely speak. "But you are. Your shoulder." "Will heal." Kieran cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle despite the violence he'd just unleashed. "Elena, your nobility, true blood, do you understand what this means?" Elena stared at him, her mind still reeling from everything that had happened. "It means I'm not who I thought I was." "It means," Kieran said, his voice fierce with joy, "that every obstacle between us just disappeared. It means you can be my queen, and no one can say a word against it." Eleanor felt tears start to fall. "But my family is gone, and I'm sorry for that. But you're here. You're alive. You're mine." Kieran pressed his forehead against hers, and Eleanor could feel him trembling with emotion. "You saved my life tonight." "You saved mine first." "Always," Kieran whispered. "I will always save you. I will always choose you. I will always love you, Elena Lysandra. No matter what name you carry, no matter what blood runs in your veins, you are everything to me." And as the palace guard secured the scene and Elena sat in the arms of the man she loved, she finally began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was allowed to have everything too. 3 days after the attack, Elena found herself standing in the great hall of the palace, wearing a dress of midnight blue silk that cost more than most people saw in a lifetime, facing a room full of nobles who looked at her like she was a puzzle they couldn't quite solve. Kieran's shoulder was healing with the supernatural speed of his shifter nature, though he still favoured his left arm. He stood beside Elena at the head of the hall, magnificent in his formal court attire, every inch the powerful Alpha King. But Elena could see the tension in his jaw, the way his free hand clenched and unclenched at his side. The emergency council session had been called at dawn. Word of Lord Valen's treachery and death had spread through the court like wildfire, along with whispers about Elena's true identity and her relationship with the king. Now, it seemed, everyone wanted answers. "Your Majesty," Lord Pemberton said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "While we are all grateful that Lord Valen's plot was thwarted, there are questions that must be addressed." Elena felt her stomach clench. Here it comes, she thought. The moment when they tell Kieran that mate bond or no mate bond, royal blood or not, she simply isn't suitable. "What questions?" Kieran's voice was dangerously quiet. Lady Cassandra stepped forward, resplendent in emerald green that made her blonde hair shine like spun gold. She was everything Eleanor was not, polished, elegant, born to this world of power and politics. When she smiled, it was sharp as a blade. "The question of succession, Your Majesty," Lady Cassandra said sweetly. "The question of alliance, the question of whether a woman who has spent her life as a servant can truly be expected to rule as queen." Eleanor's cheeks burned with shame, but before she could speak, Kieran's voice cut through the hall like a whip. "Lady Cassandra," he said, and his tone could have frozen fire. "Are you questioning my judgment?" "Of course not, Your Majesty," Lady Cassandra said, though her smile never wavered. "I'm simply concerned about the kingdom's stability. Surely you understand that the nobles will have difficulty accepting someone so inexperienced in matters of state." "Inexperienced," Kieran repeated, and Elena heard something wild creeping into his voice. "Tell me, Lady Cassandra, what experience do you have in matters of state?" Lady Cassandra's smile faltered slightly. "I was educated from birth in diplomacy, economics and governance." "Book learning," Kieran said dismissively. "Elena has something far more valuable. She has lived among the people this crown serves. She knows what it means to struggle, to work, to earn every meal and every moment of safety. She understands the cost of the decisions we make in this hall because she has paid those costs herself." Eleanor's heart swelled at his defence of her, but she could see it wasn't enough. The nobles were exchanging glances, their expressions ranging from sceptical to openly hostile. "Your Majesty!" another voice called out. Lord Hartwell, Elena remembered, Kieran having pointed him out as one of the more reasonable council members. No one questions Lady Elena's character or the king's affection for her, but there are practical considerations. Treaties, alliances, trade agreements. The nobles of neighbouring kingdoms will expect. "The nobles of neighbouring kingdoms," Kieran said, his voice rising, "can kiss my royal—" "Your Majesty," Elena said quietly, her hand finding his arm. "Please." Kieran looked down at her, and Elena saw the wolf blazing in his golden eyes. She also saw the love, the fierce protectiveness, the willingness to burn down the world for her. It was beautiful and terrifying and completely unsustainable. "They're right," Elena said, loud enough for the hall to hear. "I don't know anything about ruling. I can barely manage a conversation with a duchess without spilling something on myself. I've never negotiated a treaty or balanced a budget or done any of the things a queen is supposed to do." Elena felt rather than saw Kieran's shock, but she pressed on. "What I do know is that I love this kingdom. I love its people. I love the man who rules it." She looked directly at Lady Cassandra. "And I love him enough to want what's best for him, even if that means stepping aside." The hall erupted in murmurs of surprise and speculation. Elena felt Kieran's hand close around hers, his grip almost painful. "Elena," he said, his voice raw with warning. "Don't." "Perhaps," Lady Cassandra said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "That would be for the best. There are other options, of course. Women of proper breeding who could—" "She was never good enough," a new voice interrupted, clear, male and achingly familiar. Elena's blood turned to ice. She knew that voice. It belonged to Marcus Thornfield, the merchant's son who had courted her briefly when she first came to the palace. The man who had dropped her the moment he learned she had no dowry, no family, no prospects. Elena turned slowly, hardly believing her eyes. Marcus stood just inside the great doors, dressed in fine clothes that spoke of new wealth and success. He was handsome still, with his dark hair and charming smile, but Eleanor felt nothing but cold recognition when she looked at him. "Master Thornfield," Lady Cassandra said, her voice brightening with malicious pleasure. "How good of you to join us. Perhaps you could enlighten the court about Lady Eleanor's past associations." Marcus smiled, and Eleanor remembered why she had once found him attractive. He was charming, confident, the kind of man who made everyone in a room want to please him, the kind of man who could destroy someone with a smile. I knew Elena when she first came to work at the palace, Marcus said, his voice carrying easily through the hall. Sweet girl, eager to please, but hardly queen material, I'm afraid. Eleanor felt the familiar wash of shame and inadequacy that Marcus had always been able to trigger in her, the sense that she was reaching for something beyond her grasp, that she was fooling herself if she thought she deserved better. She threw herself at me, actually, Marcus continued conversationally, and Eleanor's face went white. Desperate for any man who would give her attention. When I explained that I needed someone more suitable, she begged me to reconsider. It was really quite pathetic. Elena's vision greyed at the edges. It wasn't true. None of it was true. Marcus had pursued her, not the other way around. He had made promises he'd never intended to keep, had led her to believe he cared about her before dropping her without explanation. But the nobles in the hall were nodding, their faces showing a mixture of pity and disgust that made Eleanor want to disappear into the floor. I see she's repeated the pattern with His Majesty, Marcus said, his smile turning cruel, though I suppose the stakes are higher now. The hall was dead silent. Elena could feel every eye on her, could sense the weight of their judgment pressing down until she could barely breathe. She opened her mouth to defend herself, to tell the truth about what had really happened between her and Marcus, but no words came. Because what was the point? They had already made up their minds about who she was, what she was worth. That's enough. Kieran's voice was so quiet that Elena almost didn't hear it, but the tone, the absolute lethal calm, made every person in the hall go still. I'm sorry, Your Majesty, Marcus said, his confidence beginning to waver. I said that's enough. Kieran took a step forward, and Eleanor saw several courtiers step back instinctively. You come into my hall uninvited and think you can spread lies about my mate? I'm simply telling the truth. You're telling lies, Kieran said, and his voice had dropped to that dangerous whisper that meant his wolf was very close to the surface. Elena never begged you for anything. Elena never threw herself at you. Elena is incapable of the manipulations you're describing because she doesn't have a dishonest bone in her body. Marcus's face was beginning to flush. Your Majesty, with respect, you didn't know her then. I know her now, Kieran said, and his voice rose to fill every corner of the hall. I know that she risks her life to save others without thinking twice about her own safety. I know that she gives her last piece of bread to hungry children in the kitchens. I know that she reads to the elderly servants when their eyes fail them, and that she sits with the sick when they have no family to comfort them. Elena felt tears start to fall. She had no idea Kieran knew about any of those things. I know, Kieran continued, his golden eyes blazing, that she would rather sacrifice her own happiness than cause me a moment's difficulty. And I know that any man stupid enough to let her go is a fool who doesn't deserve to breathe the same air she does. The hall was completely silent now, the tension so thick Eleanor could practically taste it. She saved my life, Kieran said, his voice dropping back to that lethal calm. She threw herself between me and an assassin's blade without hesitation. She is brave, she is kind, she is brilliant, and she is mine. Elena's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Noble blood or common blood, it doesn't matter, Kieran continued, his eyes never leaving Marcus's increasingly pale face. She is everything to me. She is the woman I choose, she is the woman I love, and she will be my queen. Your Majesty, Lady Cassandra tried again, her voice shrill with desperation. Surely you must consider. I have considered, Kieran said, cutting her off, and my decision is final. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small velvet box that made Eleanor's breath catch. Eleanor Lysandra, last heir of the House of Lysandra, will you do me the honour of becoming my wife? Elena stared at the ring box, her mind reeling. Around them, the hall erupted in gasps and whispers of shock. Kieran, Elena whispered, are you sure? I have never been more sure of anything in my life. Kieran dropped to one knee in front of the entire court. opening the box to reveal a ring that took Eleanor's breath away. The band was platinum, inlaid with ancient runes that seemed to glow with their own light. The centre stone was not a diamond, but something Eleanor had never seen before, a gem that shifted between gold and silver as it caught the light. "This ring has been passed down through the royal line for 1,000 years, Kieran said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "It can only be worn by the true queen, the king's destined mate. It will know if you are worthy." Eleanor looked down at the ring, then at Kieran's face. His eyes were warm with love and absolute certainty. "Yes," Eleanor whispered, then louder, "Yes." Kieran slipped the ring onto her finger, and the moment it settled into place, the stone blazed with golden light that filled the entire hall. Elena gasped as warmth raced up her arm, settling in her chest like a second heartbeat. She could feel the magic in the ring recognizing her, accepting her, claiming her as the rightful queen. Kieran rose and pulled Elena into his arms, kissing her deeply as the ring continued to glow around them. And Elena kissed him back, pouring all her love and trust and hope into the connection between them. When they broke apart, the hall was in chaos. Some nobles were applauding, others were arguing among themselves, and a few looked like they were considering leaving the kingdom entirely. But Eleanor didn't care about any of them, because Kieran was looking at her like she was his entire world, and for the first time in her life, Elena truly believed she deserved to be someone's everything. "My queen," Kieran murmured against her ear. "My king," Elena whispered back, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones like a benediction. 3 months later, Elena woke to sunlight streaming through the windows of the royal chambers and the warm weight of Kieran's arm around her waist. For a moment she lay perfectly still, marvelling at how natural this felt now, waking up beside the man she loved, knowing that she belonged here, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The weeks following their public engagement had been a whirlwind of wedding preparations, etiquette lessons, and gradually winning over the noble families who had initially opposed their union. Elena had thrown herself into learning everything she could about governance, economics and diplomacy, determined to prove that Kieran's faith in her wasn't misplaced. But more than that, she had discovered something she'd never expected. She was good at this, good at listening to people's concerns, at finding solutions that benefited everyone, at bridging the gap between the nobility and the common people. Where other queens might have focused on courtly intrigue and political manoeuvring, Eleanor brought a perspective that no one else possessed. "Good morning, my queen," Kieran murmured against her hair, his voice rough with sleep. Elena smiled, turning in his arms to face him. His golden hair was tousled, his eyes warm and content. 3 months ago, she never could have imagined waking up beside someone who looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. "Good morning, my king," Elena said softly, pressing a gentle kiss to his lips. "Sleep well?" "Always, when you're here." Kieran's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "Are you ready for today?" Today. Their wedding day. Eleanor felt a flutter of nerves and excitement in her stomach, but no fear, no doubt, just anticipation for the moment when she would officially become Kieran's wife and the kingdom's queen. "I've been ready for weeks," Eleanor said, and realised it was true. The shy, uncertain girl who had stumbled into these chambers months ago was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her own worth, who understood that love wasn't something you had to earn, but something you could choose to accept. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. "Your Majesties," came a familiar voice, "Lady Sarah is here for Queen Elena's preparations." Elena groaned, burying her face against Kieran's shoulder. "Already? It's barely dawn." Kieran chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Royal weddings require considerable preparation, I'm told." "Come in, Sarah," Elena called, sitting up and reaching for her silk robe. Lady Sarah Pemberton entered with a small army of servants behind her. Over the past months, she had become one of Elena's closest friends and advisers. Unlike her father, who had eventually come around to supporting Elena's queenship, Sarah had been enthusiastic from the beginning. "Your Majesty," Sarah said with a curtsy that was half genuine, half teasing, "time to transform you into the most beautiful bride the kingdom has ever seen." "No transforming necessary," Kieran said, pressing a kiss to Elena's temple before reluctantly releasing her. "She's already perfect." Elena felt her cheeks warm. Even after all this time, Kieran's casual declarations of love could still make her blush. "Out, Your Majesty," Sarah said firmly, shooing Kieran toward the door. "Bad luck to see the bride before the ceremony." "Since when do you believe in luck?" Kieran asked, but he was already moving toward the door. "You told me last week that we make our own destiny." "We do," Sarah said with a grin, "but tradition is tradition." Kieran paused at the door, looking back at Elena with such love and pride that it made her breath catch. "I'll see you at the altar, my heart." "I'll be the one in white," Elena said, and his answering smile lit up the room. The hours that followed were a blur of baths and hairstyling and the most beautiful dress Eleanor had ever seen. It was ivory silk with intricate beadwork that caught the light with every movement. The sleeves were long and fitted, the neckline modest but elegant, and the train would trail behind her like a river of starlight. As the servants worked, Eleanor found her mind drifting to the journey that had brought her here. The scared girl who had opened the wrong door and found her destiny waiting for her. The moments of doubt and fear, the times she had almost run away because she couldn't believe someone like Kieran could love someone like her. "Nervous?" Sarah asked, fastening a necklace of ancient diamonds around Elena's throat. "No," Elena said, surprised by the truth of it. "I should be, shouldn't I? I'm about to become queen of the entire kingdom." "You've been queen for months," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "The ceremony is just making it official." Elena looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Gone was the servant girl with work-roughened hands and simple brown dresses. In her place stood someone who looked like she belonged on a throne, who carried herself with quiet confidence and grace. But the most important change wasn't visible in the mirror. It was the knowledge, bone-deep and unshakable, that she was worthy of love, that she deserved happiness, that she had always been enough, even when she couldn't see it herself. "It's time," Sarah said softly. Elena took a deep breath and nodded. "Let's go make me a queen." The cathedral was packed with nobles from across the kingdom and beyond. As Elena walked down the aisle, her arm linked through that of Lord Pemberton, who had requested the honour of giving her away, she saw faces that had once looked at her with scepticism, now watching with genuine warmth and respect. But none of that mattered when she saw Kieran waiting for her at the altar. He was magnificent in his formal regalia, every inch the powerful Alpha King. But when their eyes met, Elena saw past all the royal trappings to the man beneath, the man who had been patient with her fears, gentle with her doubts, and fierce in his love for her. The ceremony passed in a blur of ancient vows and ritual blessings. Elena spoke her promises in a clear, strong voice that carried to every corner of the cathedral. When Kieran slipped the wedding band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, the magic in both rings blazed to life, filling the cathedral with golden light that left no doubt about the divine approval of their union. "You may kiss your queen," the Archbishop said with a smile. Kieran cupped Elena's face in his hands, his golden eyes warm with love and joy. "Hello, my wife," he murmured, just for her ears. "Hello, my husband," Elena whispered back. And when he kissed her, Elena felt like she was flying. The cathedral erupted in cheers and applause, but all she could hear was the beating of her own heart and the whisper of destiny finally fulfilled. The celebration that followed was everything Eleanor had dreamed of and more. The great hall had been transformed into a fairy tale, with flowers and candles and music that seemed to float on the air itself. Eleanor danced with Kieran until her feet ached, laughed with new friends until her sides hurt, and accepted congratulations from people who had once looked down on her. But the most meaningful moment came near the end of the evening, when Elena found herself in the palace gardens with a young girl who reminded her painfully of herself at that age. The girl was maybe 8 years old, with tangled brown hair and a dress that had seen better days. She was one of the kitchen maid's daughters, brought to see the royal wedding as a special treat. "You used to work in the kitchens," the girl said, her voice awed. "Cook told me. You really used to be like me." Elena knelt down so they were eye to eye. "What's your name?" "Mary, Your Majesty," the girl said, with an attempted curtsy. "Hello, Mary. And yes, I used to work in the kitchens. I used to carry laundry and scrub floors and do all the things you probably help your mother with." Mary's eyes were wide with wonder. "And now you're queen." "Now I'm queen," Elena agreed. "Do you know what that means?" Mary shook her head. "It means that who you are right now doesn't determine who you'll become," Elena said gently. "It means that being kind and brave and good matters more than where you start in life. It means that dreams can come true if you're willing to work for them and brave enough to believe you deserve them." Mary considered this seriously. "Do you think I could be anything I want to be?" Elena smiled, thinking of Sister Margaret and her beautiful handwriting, of all the dreams she had thought were impossible for a girl like her. "I think you can be anything you're brave enough to become," Elena said, "and I think the world is waiting to see what that will be." Mary beamed and scampered off to rejoin her mother, leaving Elena alone in the moonlit garden with a heart full of joy and purpose. "There you are," Kieran's voice came from behind her. "I was wondering where my queen had disappeared to." Eleanor turned to find him watching her with that expression that still made her knees weak, like she was the most amazing thing he'd ever seen. "Just making a new friend," Elena said, moving into his arms, and thinking about how strange life is. "Strange how?" "A year ago I was invisible, nobody, a girl with no family, no prospects, no reason to believe that anything would ever change." Elena looked up at the stars scattered across the night sky. "And now I'm married to the most wonderful man in the world. I'm queen of a kingdom I love, and I get to spend the rest of my life helping people like that little girl believe in their own possibilities." Kieran's arms tightened around her. "Do you regret anything? The simplicity you gave up? The quiet life you could have had?" Elena considered the question seriously, then smiled. "How can I regret the path that led me to you? How can I regret finding out that I was capable of so much more than I ever imagined?" "I love you, Elena Lysandra," Kieran said softly. "My queen, my mate, my heart." "I love you too," Elena whispered against his lips. "My king, my destiny, my home." As they kissed in the moonlit garden, Elena felt the golden thread that bound them together pulse with warmth and contentment. She had found her place in the world, her purpose, her person. She had learned that love wasn't about being worthy. It was about being brave enough to accept that you already were. And she had learned that sometimes the wrong door is exactly the right door after all. Where are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments below. I love hearing your thoughts on these stories of love and second chances. If you'd like to support me and help more people discover tales like Elena and Kieran's, please subscribe. It's free and it means the world to me. Thank you for joining me on this journey from servant girl to queen, from loneliness to love, from doubt to destiny. Until next time, may you always be brave enough to walk through the doors that scare you most.